Hola.
Hola, Fer.
¿Me escuchas?
Sí te escucho.
Yeah. Ahorita te hago.
Co-host, please.
Oh.
Steven.
Hi, Gabriella.
How's it going?
It's going all right. How are things with you?
Good. Let me see. Just get organized here so you can be able to share your screen.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi, Steven. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me. First time.
We have Lickblau next week.
Oh. He's doing pretty well. He raised, I think, 20 million or something in the next round.
Yeah, he announced Series B. Although, from what I understood, he was raising 2 Series Bs in parallel. I didn't know that existed. Series BA and Series BB. So, Steven, did you have a chance to take a look at the one-pagers?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Well, no, just briefly, there's a few B2B companies. There's a couple B2C companies as well. So,
okay. Where would this one pager be?
Carmen,
I should have sent it like I sent it
Okay.
like maybe 2 months ago.
Okay. Oh, that's fine.
Don't worry about looking for it right now. I think we'll do with whatever you have and what we discussed about around planning for growth and not just growth for the sake of growth. And yeah, just telling your story, how you approach growth. And
Okay. It does have definitely an organizational sort of setup type of feel. It's just, just random stuff I've encountered. It's really all it is.
Steven, how should I introduce you? What's your new role?
Actually, it's the same as the old one. It's just the head of digital strategy and growth at SIBO. Although it's really more marketing tech ops. But I can go over that stuff too.
great. And yeah, it's your space. You feel free to open up to questions in between or just at the end, however you feel more comfortable. And I'm gonna start letting everyone in, and then Fernando can introduce you after I say hello to everyone. Hola, hola.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola.
Buenas tardes.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están?
Hola.
Buenas tardes, hola.
¿Cómo están? Buenas tardes a todos.
Buenas tardes con todos.
Hola, muy buenas tardes.
Bueno, creo que le voy a pasar rápidamente la palabra a Fernando para que presente al mentor de hoy, Steven Cheng, que nos estará conversando un poquito sobre Planning for Growth. Y como a mí me está atacando una aspiradora acá al lado, voy a poner en mute y dejar que Fernando haga la intro.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing Steven Cheng. He's an ex-colleague of mine at ETF.com, and he's currently the head of digital marketing and growth for SIBO, the Chicago Board Options Exchange. But he has a very long and distinguished career, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from him today. Stephen, welcome.
Hi, hey folks. Well, let me share my screen first. See how this works. All right. Okay, hopefully this is full screen, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
great.
So when Fernando asked me to do this originally, I was like, no, I don't want to do this. But yeah, I said, like, look, you know, there are bazillion resources out there, blogs or whatever, to learn about growth tactics or growth channels. And you know, I've been doing sort of growth work and for a while, and you know, those were just never really the things that got in my way. And so it's like, fine, I'll give a presentation on basically things that got in the way of growth that nobody warned me about at the company. And so I know the title is planning for growth, but it was just there are all these things that sort of can get in the way of growth that nobody ever thinks about. They always just think about the same thing as everybody else. So that's basically what I want to talk about today. So about me, there's a lot of stuff that I've had to grow over the years. So everything ranging from like B2C commerce, or like ETF.com, it was like content, data, and tools. Also ETF.com doing demand gen for events. At SIBO, it's about financial derivatives, proprietary trading products, enterprise data as a service, basically. So I've been all over, from B2C to B2B, all sorts of different products now at a financial exchange. And then the tool sets that I ended up using or learning to do all this stuff is things like demand generation, like traffic acquisition, you know, conversion, retention, that kind of stuff, content marketing, analytics, product management, and product marketing. You have to have a decent understanding of sales, technology, and operations to all make it work. So if you're asking me what I really do, it's trying to get all of these things in sync so that the business can grow in a certain direction, as opposed to being like a specialist in one of these areas. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. I've been doing this type of work for maybe about 15 years. You know, usually when I join companies, I try to evaluate like if I'm the right fit for them, right? I mean, let's go into sort of any company, so to speak. And so basically I try to say, are they ready are they ready to grow? So I tend to look for things like, does this business strategy make sense to me? You know, how good are the products? How good is the reputation? You know, do they sort of have that market penetration? You know, or you want to call it product market fit, whatever you want to call it. Are there smart, creative people there? And there's deep subject matter expertise. And you know, the number of companies I've worked with meet these characteristics, and so everything looks really good, right? I mean, as somebody who's trying to grow this digital aspect of their business, but you know, for whatever reason, they just never really quite worked out the way I thought they did. I mean, that doesn't mean they didn't grow. I mean, some of them grew pretty well, but it never reached their potential, which I thought was, you know, maybe a little sad, I think, in a way. And you would see things like the product market fit might have been good at the start, but it starts to deteriorate more over time. You know, you get things like bad team morale and you know, turnover, or sort of this internal warfare that comes within business groups. And I'm talking about like, I'm not talking about like a group of 5 people or whatever, right? I'm talking about like, okay, so maybe you grew from 40 million to 60 million, or like 5 million to 10 million. Now what, right? What brought you to one level isn't the same thing that what brings you to another level. And it's always been curious to me that, you know, whatever company I've been at, I never thought that the business fundamentals, like any of these things, were the reasons why we stopped growing. It was always something else about the organization that got in the way. And I think it doesn't get enough attention for companies. Like, your org structure is a really big deal for your growth. Managing that increase in complexity is a really, really big deal. I never felt like we didn't have a chance. I never felt like we couldn't innovate our way out of a problem. I never thought we couldn't compete. But the problem was that you could just sort of see it wasn't going to happen, because organizationally speaking, we just didn't have the right alignment or whatever to sort of compete over the long haul. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And so the symptoms versus disease, you start adding more features to the product. You kind of do this pivot thrashing where you're like, let's try A, then 3 months later, let's try B, let's try C. And they like to say, well, we're trying to be agile and, go to a different direction, but what it really is, you just don't know what to do. You're just literally thrashing, hoping that you just sort of luck onto the problem. They sort of react to problems instead of getting ahead of them, like sort of quote, preventing the problems from occurring, acquisition and mergers, and endless reorgs or whatever. And this is the stuff that I tend to experience, when that growth starts to peter out. Okay. So if you ask me the number one thing that probably gets in the way of organizations' growth in general, now again, I wouldn't say it's product, I wouldn't say it's their growth strategy or any of these things, right? Actually, if you ask me across all the companies I worked with, it tends to be bad team leads. They're just, or they're not suited for it, they're just inappropriate for it, and people really don't give this the attention that it really needs. Basically, and all of this stuff is just my opinion on my experiences, so I can only speak from my point of view. To me, the basic role of a team lead, just the real bare basics, right? Can you align the functions underneath you towards a business objective? So I might be the head of, say, demand generation or whatever, but can I get my, marketing automation in sync with my user experience, in sync with my traffic acquisition, so that they're all aligned towards this one growth thing that's a core value, core job of a manager? Can I get resources for my team? Can I be a strong advocate for my team? Can I execute on a vision for their functional role? Can I be held accountable for the quality of execution? People think this is really basic stuff, but it's not. I mean, we've all been part of companies where you just see bosses fail at these things. And when they fail, their teams are really have a big anchor. So all I would say is, what are the 3 to 5 things you really want your managers to be, and you really, really focus hard on it. Don't just, well, I'll give you some examples of later on. So obviously a bad boss affects the entire team and other teams, right? So you really, it's tough to deal with. And so what are some ideal traits on this, at least from my point of view? Like, if you're looking for team leads, who should you promote? And I'll give an example of some bad signals for it. And here are the ones I tend to look at, right? Who do people naturally turn to when they need help? Who can calm people down and remove volatility from the situation and help the group out? Who adapts with uncertainty, especially if you're trying to grow really fast in an area, the future's really murky. You need somebody who can adapt. You don't really want an optimizer for that stuff. Who mentors the relatively junior players, right? Because you won't be able to always hire somebody who's really advanced in a space or whatever. Sometimes you just have to get people on potential and then bring them up. Who cares about their team's success? Who can sell the team on the strategy? Like, it's not just do what I say as a manager, but I need my team to believe that this is the right way to go after a pretty robust discussion. And then, does your team understand what its role is in advancing the company's greater perspective? These are, again, these to me are the traits of people you should promote, right? People are complex, right? They're not robots. They worry about where they are in the hierarchy. There's a private life versus a work life. They fear things, they desire things, right? So good managers, what I say is, they stop that bad day from becoming a bad loop, right? They bring transparency, redundancy, accountability. They make the hard decisions that other people don't want to do. So if you have somebody who doesn't really like conflict or whatever, it can't be a manager, right? The manager is really about managing conflict. Can you empathize with your team? How do you deal with this stuff that all human beings go through? They're not robots to sort of do your bidding. So I've seen a lot of this from my company and other companies. My friends and I talk about this all the time. You really got to be really wary of false positives for team lead signals. So to me, these are core signs of a good lead, right? And these are, to me, bad signs of a good lead. I see a lot of companies promote on this basis, and they just get a bunch of bad managers, and then everything fails, right? And so they pick the subject matter expert or the smartest person to be the manager. They assume that just because they're smart, they will automatically be a good team lead. You know, they pick the theoretically good people, fancy degrees, come from a prestigious company. They sell things really well, you know, like with, you know, just talking or whatever, or they're just really nice. Why don't we promote this person? Or, hey, they've been here for X amount of years. We need to promote that person ahead of the others. Like, don't do these things, right? Because they have nothing to do, I don't say nothing to do, but they don't have a lot to do with these other core traits. If you can't do these well, I don't think you're going to be an effective manager. If you have these, you could be a bad one. And so I'll give you an example of false positive. Like, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, and I've experienced this. And I've got a friend, for instance, who was at a startup, and you know, they brought on some person from Facebook to help with their marketing. It's like, well, they're from Facebook, right? So they're going to be great. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe if they were part of Facebook when they had 3 employees, but when Facebook had 8,000 or 15,000 employees, who knows what that impact of that person was on Facebook? And sure enough, that person couldn't do well in a small environment without a bazillion resources. And so she didn't do well at the startup, right? It was just out of context. Like, it didn't have any, but they were so caught up on the fancy name or a fancy school, like especially in the Bay Area, right? I mean, it's very cliquey. If you're from Stanford, then the Stanford people want to hire you, or if you're from this Ivy League thing, and it just you know, that doesn't mean anything for real work or real business, or nice or seniority. I know, like, you've been there for 10 years doesn't mean you get to be a manager, right? Similarly, like, people, if you can smell them out in your company, the kingdom builders, the ones who are always asking for more things to go to them and their stuff isn't really all that good, you can't promote those people either, basically. And, you know, I'm going to say, like, also there's a sort of, you know, adaptability versus optimization. Think very hard about what you want out of that position. So I'll give you an example, like accounting, you're going to focus really hard on the optimization, right? Because it's sort of what accountants do. They need high precision. Your numbers have to add up. But a product manager, you probably want more adaptability, especially since there's so much uncertainty or whatever. So, you know, pick the traits that you really go. My personal feeling is that the higher up you go, the more adaptable you have to be and the more you have to focus on managing risks. So at one company I know, they promoted somebody I know to like VP of engineering, but he was always the first one to say, like, no, we can't do this for this reasons. There's too much risk in that. Like, always thinking of ways to say no, instead of thinking of ways to say, like, well, you know, we could do these things and this is how we're going to manage the risk. Like, the higher up you go, that's the more the attitude that you need, not somebody who's you know, sort of over focus on optimization, because optimization makes you brittle. It sort of assumes that the future will look like the past. Are you folks familiar with the Peter principle? I don't know how I would get the response from people in this this group.
No. Can you
No.
explain, please?
Okay. So I don't know what the origins are of this phrase. Maybe some poor person named Peter, but the Peter principle basically says that you will promote people to their incompetence level, right? You're going to keep on bringing them up until finally you get to an area where they're going to do bad at the job. You will promote them to the point of failure, basically. And so this happens a lot. They might have been a good manager, but they're a bad director. They might be a good individual contributor. They might be a bad manager, et cetera, et cetera. So this is probably like one of the biggest killers that I've seen in companies. So the only way I've been able to figure out to avoid it, and this is personally what I did my own career, was that, you know, make that person do the work of the higher position first. Do not promote them and then say, let's see how it works, right? Because if it doesn't work, you're in trouble. You can either fire that person, you can demote that person, or what most people do, they leave the person in charge and they try to work around it, which is usually a sort of an organizational disaster. Get feedback from the rank and file. I mean, don't rely on just your assessment, or worse, the assessment of your immediate management team on somebody. Like, go to the analyst who's doing the work, or the individual developer who's doing the work, who has to interact with that same person. Get their opinions. So early on in my career, I worked at some place where it was a fancy, you know, startup or whatever, raised a lot of money, but it was a terrible company. And so I was having lunch with somebody who had come from McKinsey to be a VP. He's asking me some questions, and I was just telling him this is how things really work, here. And I gave him examples of like, hey, I might be totally wrong, so go look for your own evidence. And he was quiet for a second. He goes, "Oh, I wish I had this lunch before I took the job," right? And it turned out to be the disaster that I was explained to be. And then you get better feedback, I think, from the people who are really doing the work than I think higher up. Just my opinion. There's a saying, a leader without followers is just someone out for a walk. So you want to find somebody, like they need to show before they get the position. Like, can they sell a vision to others to get them to buy in? Not command them, not order them, right? You need to be able to sell that growth vision. So at ETF.com, nobody reported to me. I'm just a lone head of growth, but I have to sell Fernando and his team on, if we do these development projects, we're going to some good things are going to happen. I have to go sell the research team, like, hey, I need your time to create this type of content, or product management to create these types of tools, right? So I have a growth vision in mind, but nobody's going to follow me just because I'm a head of growth guy. I mean, I have to sell them on it. I need to buy in. If I can't sell them on it, then maybe that growth vision really isn't all that good. And you don't want leaders who sort of command attention or demand stuff. And I've always personally felt that promotion should come with risk. So as I promote you, I'm gonna hold you accountable for more stuff, right? And if you're not confident about yourself, you should be worried, because as I hold you more accountable and the variability increases as you have more senior roles or whatever, then if there's more chance of something going wrong. If it doesn't work, something bad's going to happen to you, right? It can't be all upside, like, oh, I get to do less work, I get some reports, I get more pay. Like, you're going to select for the wrong sort of people on that. So I think if you have promotions that come with more risk, where you're more accountable, so I want to be held accountable for the growth, right? Because that's how I separate myself from sort of pretenders who just want to talk about fancy ideas or whatever. But it's how you separate the empire builders, the politicians, the talkers. It's how you separate them from the people who will, really do the work and do it well. For uncertain promotions, you can pick ambiguous titles. So formal titles, I know exactly where you are in the org chart: VP, CEO, whatever, director, manager. If you don't know the quality of a person, basically give them more ambiguous titles, like a head, a lead, a specialist, right? And that allows you, if they don't quite pan out, you can put somebody on top of them without necessarily making them feel bad, or it allows you to shrink the role without like having a mismatch between the title. And some startups I've seen have gone to basically early on, they do a lot of this basically to prevent having a org structure that sort of becomes permanent, basically. You should think about a strong career track for individual contributors who basically won't be able to manage a team or manage a group or whatever. You need to think about what that career track looks like for them, because a lot of people associate managing teams, whatever, as a way to get promoted, but they might not be any good at it, but they might be a perfectly great individual contributor. So think about what you want to call that, junior programmer, senior level 2, architect, fellow. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing that, but I think a lot of companies don't really think about this. And so, you're not going to pay your manager better than some star programmer just because he has a manager. That's a terrible idea. So you need to come up with some levels for those individual contributors. And then also I'd say if you hired somebody, if you want to promote somebody because you want to give it a shot, there's nothing wrong with that. But correct those mistakes fast if it's not working. Don't work around it, right? Don't try to cover for them. Correct the mistake, because everybody else basically is looking at you on that. Before I go on, does anybody have any thoughts on sort of issues that they've encountered along this path, that they wanted to share for the group, or is it just all some random thing in my head?
Hello. All right.
Luciano,
Sí.
do you have?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Thanks. Just one thing that is happening to us right now is that as a startup, you start with your, let's say the first team that joins you at the beginning, but as a startup you end up with the first few people, and then you grow, And something is that happening to me is that the very first people that were in my team is not right now. And we are in a different stage, different challenges, more challenges, different challenges. And this very same people is not probably up to that challenge right now. But at the same time are the same people that made a huge commitment at the beginning to be on board with you. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think you, I mean, again, this is just my own personal opinion. I mean, I think you sort of have an honest opinion of honest discussion, like, look, we need these things. So obviously you should basically make a pretty good plan of why you think this person doesn't fit, right? And you probably have given them opportunities to show that they could fit this position, and maybe it didn't work out. So you do have to build some sort of documentation on why you don't think, you know, they're for a certain role. They could still be really good at the role, you know, that they're in. They could still provide value to the company, but I mean, I think you sort of have an honest discussion. This is what I need from you. This is what we tried. This is what happened. You know, for this company to grow, I need somebody who can do these things that I needed for them. And it's, you know, at any level, doesn't matter if you're manager or CEO. I mean, it's a hard discussion to have because how they think of themselves and how you think of them separately, you know, isn't always the same. And again, it helps if you talk to other folks. I mean, I know it's tricky in a small company, everybody talks to each other, but if, you know, if you're the only person who believes this, maybe it's not true. But if other people also are saying like, yeah, they didn't do well on those few things, that's just more documentation to show like, look, you know, we really value your contributions and everything, but, you know, you're not going to take us, well, I mean, you're going to say this a little bit nicer, but we need this to get to the next level. And, you know, we just don't think you're going to be able to do it. I mean, it's a tough conversation to have, but I mean, honestly, that's why you're CEO or whatever. That's why you have a higher position. You're paid to make the hard, tough decisions, basically, and sort of manage that risk. So that's probably what I would say. I mean, does that sound like that would help?
Okay, thanks.
I have a question, Steve. Or so.
Go ahead, Marcelo.
Yeah, you mentioned something that's really interesting. You mentioned that sometimes you try to justify when things aren't going so well, and you try to pivot and, you know, pretend like you're being agile when in reality you don't really have a great product. But I've had in the past experiences where I believe that we have a good product, like I honestly believe in the product, and it doesn't turn out that way. And sometimes maybe something that you didn't think it was that great ended up generating better results. So what are some key things you would recommend for us to look for to actually know if you have a good product or not? Because you know, the startup team, they usually believe in what they do, and they don't want to, you know, self-talk in a negative way, like, oh, we should change or go back to basics. But I mean, I think you bring a really interesting point, because it's hard to look to the basics and be like, well, are we really offering a good, solid product? And at what point do you think you need to go back and actually look at that, or do you constantly look at that basis that you're talking about?
Actually, my own, I will talk about this a little bit later on in this presentation, but I'll go ahead and talk about it here, like, too. It's like, you know, ultimately the customer is the judge of whether or not you have a great product or not. And so I've seen some companies, and like ETF.com was a good example too. I mean, you showed lots of growth, but I mean, growth by itself doesn't mean anything, right? So my personal bias is to look at growth in customer segments. So you might be growing like this, but is it the right customer that you wanted where that growth is? And so you break them out by segments. You say, okay, are we showing the right growth in that particular segment? And if the answer is, you know, you don't care about the segment that's growing really big, and there's this other segment you cared a lot about, but it's not showing much growth at all, well, then you have a hard decision to make. Like, do you want to go to where the growth is, or do you want to continue to double down and triple down on the segment that isn't showing any traction? It just depends on how much faith you have on there. And it depends, you know, also, I mean, this is purely on an emotional level, okay? if you really believe in this group and it's like your life mission to help this group, then yeah, just triple down until you blow up, you know, because it's really your conviction, right? But a lot of other people, you know, they don't really care. They just want to create something successful that other people will use and make money or whatever, right? So they'll go where the growth is instead. Basically, they did, and that's a full pivot because you go to where your traction is. And so another friend of mine, they worked with a company. Their original plan was to do like kind of create your own videos easily and stuff. And they just weren't getting any traction whatsoever. The growth was a kind of a flat line, right? They showed a little bit of growth. And so what they did is they took a look at their user base and they sub-segment. And so what segmentation should you use? There's multiple ways that you can pivot on your customer base. So one thing that they looked at was like, well, what professions do these people come from? Because originally they want to make it some sort of general mass tool, right? And what they found out was that teachers looked like they were overrepresented in the group. And then they realized teachers were using it as a training tool for their students. And so they would say, okay, we're not going to go anywhere here on this. So they saw the segment was using it. They did interviews. You always have to talk to the customer, get out of the building, so to speak, and talk to the customer about why is it this group is using it more? Or conversely, why is your target group not using it as much either? And then they pivoted to education, right? Now they're one of the larger ed tech startups in the US, a company called Seesaw. And so, you know, that's probably what I would tell folks. You know, where do you fit on that spectrum on that one? And I'll talk about segmentation a little bit.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
I think we have another question from Vale.
Yeah, hi, Steven, how are you? Talking about a little bit about leading people and personnel and stuff, you hear a lot about, you know, hire fast and like a hire slow and fire fast and be very, you know, strenuous and be, you know, ask the Elon Musk question and be very, you know, dive into how smart they are. But what happens when when you don't have like an amazing talent pool of super smart people that are all coming in, and you just kind of have to settle, you need to fill a role, and then you're like, well, none of these are amazing, but I've ran out of options. Do you have any insights on those types of situations?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there are a few. Trust me, I've been in this situation a lot too. The Elon Musk one is what I do too. And it's not so much hiring really smart people, is that especially in the digital space, there's a lot of bullshitters out there. So it's like, all right, let's talk shop. I used to set up these campaigns. You used to set up these campaigns. Talk me how you're going to walk through a campaign. And I want every detail, right? And then I can quickly figure out who are the fakers and who knows what they're talking about. But you know, you can only do that if you've spent a lot of time in that one area. But yeah, you got to be ruthless on like, I want to know every single little thing that you did. And the ones who've done it, well, they just ramble like I'm rambling right now. They almost can't stop themselves from talking. The ones who didn't really do it, they run out of stuff to say in about a few minutes. Okay, that's the Elon Musk part of it. The other one about like, basically, is it good enough? Is it good enough to move on? Like there's sort of two philosophies, especially in the Bay Area. Bay Area approach was like, no, hold out for the superstar. I don't care if you have to hold out for 2 years, like hold out for the superstar because we're a company full of superstars, right? And, you know, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was saying yes.
Yeah, okay. Pragmatically speaking, I don't really subscribe to that theory. I mean, you all know what a power rule is, right? Like, you know, 20% of the folks probably contribute 80% of the value. It doesn't mean the other 80% are important. They allow that 20% to do that work. But odds are there's only going to be a few people who are really going to push your organization, you know, really to, you know, great heights or whatever. So what I try to do is like, look, if there's some bottleneck in my team or the org, in my head, I have this informal list of like, what are the biggest problems preventing me from success in this company, right? And if I can remove that bottleneck, that frees up like 3 other things to happen because I hired somebody good enough to do that job, that's a big deal, right? It's not just about the efficiency of that one person, if they're a superstar or not. It's like, no, if I solve this problem, can I now tackle these other 3 problems? And what's my net benefit of being able to do that, right? So I'm going to make this up. I don't want to insult anybody, but like, do I really need a superstar QA manager, or can I just get one that's good enough to get my lead developers to move on to more important projects? Like, you've got to think about it like a portfolio. And that's basically my answer to that question. That's what I try to do. It's like, I try to remove the biggest bottleneck to my growth. so I can move on to the next problem, but I really don't want this problem hanging around for 2 years. But then again, if you're some AI company and you need some, really genius AI person to solve these really hard problems, yeah, you probably want to hold out for the superstar. There's much more leverage in that position than some other ones.
Sorry, I said thanks.
No.
My bad.
Sure, no problem. And you think, also before I go off this, like, I don't like quoting Steve Jobs because I think the guy's, he's a genius, but kind of a jerk too. I wouldn't want to work for him. But he does have a few sayings that I have seen, and I understand like how these work. And so the saying is that basically A people hire A people, which means they might be better than you, right? The person who hires, like a good A person hires people that are better than them, or at least at the same level, right? But a B person will hire a C person. They will hire somebody below, right? To make them feel safe, to protect their career, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so once that happens, it's kind of like math. Like if there's an A here and he hires another A, you're great. You have this population of A's. But if a B hires a C, God knows what the C person will hire. Like they'll probably hire somebody even worse, right? And so you get what's called a bozo explosion, right? You just get this proliferation of C's because the B's are hiring multiple people, and whoever knows what the C's happens. Like, I don't know, to me, that's killed a lot more companies' growth prospects than any product or any growth strategy. The company just couldn't, companies I've worked with, once they grew to a certain point, they just couldn't get aligned. They couldn't reconfigure themselves to match that next level of growth. Because the middle management, people poo-poo middle management all the time, saying, oh, worthless, useless. No, they serve a function, right? It's how things get done. It's how information gets through the company, right? If that layer is bad, even if you have a superstar programmer or a superstar product manager, whatever, you're really against you. How is the organization going to shift when times get tough or whatever? If you've got this, they don't have to be geniuses. They just have to be people who work well together, right? Work well together, give a shit about each other's success. Like, it's not really that hard, but I don't know. For some reason, companies really struggle with this concept. Like, a bunch of smart people can't work well together. That's called civil war. Like, it's a really unpleasant experience to be with. Now they use that intelligence to go attack each other. It's really ugly stuff. So you're all founders. You all have problems I don't have. But as a growth guy, that's what I would ask of the next companies. Like, how well do you work well together? Because I've seen a lot more places their growth killed by the internal organization than I ever have on their product strategy, or their growth channels. I know this isn't really the presentation you're probably expecting, but. Okay. Is any other comments or stories that people would want to share on the org, on the struggles they're having on the org? Because lots of organizations suffer from the same thing, from small to large.
Just a thing that I'm reading a book called Why Startups Fail. Okay, and one of the reasons is that you fail to hire the right people at the right moment. Okay, and the other one is that in another conference from another mentor last week, the guy said you need to hire ninjas. Why? Because you have a very committed people. Yeah, they give their life for you, but they also have a lot of experience and they are very good at doing what they're doing. So they are not junior. Okay, that was an excellent advice.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, I'd also say, like, get a mix. Get some older hands on there, obviously, who are used to the craziness of a startup, but can add just enough process to weed out the craziness, but not too much process so that they're slow. It's a very tricky thing, right? But some experience is fine. I don't think you want, I don't know. In my mind, I don't think you necessarily want a bunch of 22-year-olds figuring out how to manage a team for the first time, right? It's just, there's so much chaos that's caused, so many personal things. And it helps to have at least a few, it's like a soccer team or a basketball team. It's always good to have a few veterans there to sort of calm the rest down and get it set up. But yeah, I would sort of agree on a lot of that. I tend to hire personally with people with potential first, and then I can always teach the skills. It's not really that hard. There's plenty of training material out there. But if you could be pretty good at your job, if I get a whiff, you can't play well with the other kids, then I'm not going to bring you on board because it's just too high.
if you're having exponential growth, you don't have time to mentor or to teach people, I think.
I've heard that. I don't know if I believe that necessarily. You know, I mean, I get why it's true, but I mean, in my mind, if you're an organization, if you can't train personnel, I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to be a great store, but it's big picture. If your organization cannot train people, okay, then you're going to have a fundamental scalability problem, because that means you're always going to have to bring on people who have a lot of experience on this. So how are you going to scale, right? I mean, at some point, like, this is math, right? If I have 1,000 people and they can all teach, I can now mentor, let's say, another 500 people, or you could go out and hire another 500 people, right? One's a lot more scalable than the other. I think it's a big deal. You might want to check out some of Ben Horowitz's talking about that, about training, being able to train. An organization that's be able to train, bring on new people and bring them up, you know, that's there too. But yeah, everybody's situation is a little different, so I mean, it's kind of hard to say. But that's just my personal feelings. Okay. Hope I don't run out of time. Sorry, I started in too fast. Okay, functional misalignment is a little bit similar to that stuff. I think once you get rid of the human being issues, like, it is surprisingly common, whether you're a small company or a big company, nobody knows who's accountable for success. So again, that person who's accountable has to create a project vision for whatever scope or function that they're in. You really need to get the organizational buy-in for that vision, right? Unless you're the founder, then you can just say, this is my vision. Either you want to do this or you don't want to do this. But if you're not the founder and you're, you know, like a director or hired for a manager, there's vision at every level, right? How do you deal with the risk management, like being accountable for taking good risks versus kind of, bad risks? You know, all of you will make compromises on your delivery. Who's going to be accountable for sort of making those calls? And then, of course, there's accountable for the process, and there's being accountable for the results. And they're kind of two separate things. If you're too results driven, right, then you're just going to get a bunch of conservative estimates or turnover as you get rid of them. And if you weigh too much on the process, not enough on the results, you're not going to get the results that you need. But this is it was a surprisingly common problem. And one of the reasons why I like to take these growth jobs is very easy. If I'm not doing my job, if I'm not growing it, you just get rid of me, right? So I'm accountable for the growth of that. If you're not seeing it, that's my fault, basically. But I see this all the time for, like, who's responsible for product success in your company? And product manager will be like, well, no, sales isn't doing a good job. Sales will be like, well, marketing's not giving me the right leads, right? No, I want one neck. Well, I know it's not a great analogy. I want one neck to strangle, like, and that person's neck is responsible for getting all those functions in line to get that growth. This is surprisingly common. Nobody's accountable for this type of stuff. And if you don't have it, it's a real killer, because the people who are working underneath you, they don't like that uncertainty. They don't like that flailing. You'll have random people from these different functions I just mentioned step in to try to take the lead, which means they're going to trip over each other all the time, lots of infighting. So there's no vision, there's no conviction. And I'm not talking about it at the super corporate level or company-wide level. I'm even at the project level, what they're trying to get across. And so you get what's called the cheese pizza problem, whereas one person doesn't like pepperoni, one person doesn't like sausage, one person only likes vegetables. And so you come up with the one solution that will make everybody happy, that makes nobody happy. So it's essentially no point of view on executing on that project. You really don't want that, right? Empower, whether it's one person or maybe some sort of weird council of 3 people, there has to be some sort of conflict resolution. Says this person is accountable for it. Therefore, this person gets to make the final call on how to move forward on this. And the folks who are contributing to that have to be sort of aligned to it. As you get to the harder problems where not everybody just agrees to that solution. Don't pick an org structure that invites conflict. And so this is kind of the accountability thing that I was talking about before. But I'll give you an example. One company I worked with, there was a head of revenue, and then there was a head of product strategy. And they reported to different people. And it's like, well, how can you have that? Like, if I was in charge of the revenue for a product, I would expect the product strategy to go under my business line. I wouldn't expect it to go over there, right? And so now you have this constant warfare from the product strategy person because he doesn't report into the general manager, and the general manager reports into somebody else, right? That's just a company that's not going to grow, and it's just going to have a lot of pain, basically. So, for instance, you might have different functional leads, marketing, sales, support, dev. They probably report into, and this is kind of a bigger company structure, but I'm just using it as an example of a more rational structure. Those report into a GM. The GM is responsible, again, for aligning all of those functions towards a common growth goal. But let's say you have multiple business lines or multiple product lines, right? Then fine. All those product managers report into some level, right? Or all the different operational lines report into CEO. You need tiebreakers, right? You need somebody to make a decision to get rid of the ambiguity and the uncertainty. Of course, ultimately the CEO is the top, but like, pick somewhere where you have nexus points for alignment and or accountability. This didn't work, right? Not that it's your fault per se, but you are responsible for the success, whether it's operational, whether it's revenue, whether it's growth or whatever. Like, you need to go to that one person, and then that clears up a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people. It puts a lot of pressure on that one person, but it's good because you select for the people who want that pressure and that challenge, and the people who don't want that pressure don't go there. So at another company, I was in charge of the revenue for it, and the product manager, wasn't. So what happened? I get to call a lot more of the shots, right? Because I'm in charge of the P&L. That other person was just in charge of the product, and that person didn't want the responsibility, right? So it flows towards a natural owner. So this is just I'm surprised at the number of companies who cannot get the authority accountability mix right. So if you have high accountability, you need high authority, or vice versa. If you have high authority, you should have high accountability. Then you get survival of the fittest. You get the best people who can deliver good execution and good results, right? And they can align all those functions, like I said. If you have a job that's high accountability but low authority, you should look for another job. That's a terrible, terrible job, because then people blame you for shit and you can't do anything about it, right? So this is a bad job. If it's low accountability, low authority, why is this even a job? You should just get rid of it. Like, you should probably audit your organization for this kind of mix. And then in a given function, if you have low accountability and high authority, everybody else should look for a job. And so the stereotypical example for this that I find, not to badmouth any former employees, would be like a head of strategy, right? High authority, low accountability. Like, what are you accountable for exactly? You don't have to ship product. You don't have to bring in numbers like sales. You don't have to bring in leads. And yet you can, determine a lot of what everybody else can do because you're this quote strategy person. So, don't have these. This is miserable. This might kill you. This is the ideal situation, and just get rid of these positions entirely. But I see this mismatch all the time in companies. It always boggles my mind. Okay, corporate infighting. You must deal with this really harshly. No fiefdoms, no schemers, right? And we've all worked with people who do this. They hoard data. They hoard access. They throw what I call drama bombs at other departments. If something comes by, the whole department has to start doing something to respond to this other person, right? As founders, you really need to be on the lookout for this type of behavior, and you need to kill it very, very quickly, right? No transparency how things are doing, too much talk, not enough do. There's so many stories about bad politics and startups and whatever, and you see them in bigger companies too. And it's really strange in startups because they're so small. You would think there's no room for something like this, but there's a surprisingly large amount of room. The person who always talks badly about the other employees, right? You really have to look at those people closely. Call a winner. Like, if two rational, reasonable people don't agree, right? It's your job as founder or whatever to not be in this constant state of civil war. Declare a direction and move them on. Like, get the best data you can, right? Make a direction. So there's a saying, like, you can disagree, but you must commit, right? So after I let you have your opinion and we have our say, okay, some decision maker nexus is going to say, we're going to go here. And if they can't do that, you should probably get rid of them, because then good people can start to become bad anchors, basically. Just, you can disagree, but you have to commit. We're going to go this way. Resolve these issues quickly. I know a lot of people don't want to do this because they don't like the conflict, they don't like the arguments or whatever, but it's a real impediment to your growth. This is going to be a fun one since you're all founders and stuff. So resist the temptation to play king. Like, basically you should think really hard. What prevents you as a founder CEO from sabotaging your own company? Okay. And so what happens? You can't get out of the day-to-day stuff because you don't trust them to do the work. Even if you've hired people to do the work, you still can't get out of doing the work. You either got to get rid of that person because they're not meeting your expectations, or you have to change your behavior. One and two, it's a hard thing either way. Don't use the organization as a vehicle to feel good about yourself. And I see a lot of startups do this. Like, you can tell, like, it's the founder CEO really gets off on they're the king, the head person. That's also a good way for the company to eventually blow up. Don't second guess your reports or your reports. Like, if you don't trust them to do the job, get rid of them and bring on somebody you do trust, or I'm sure there's certain edge cases like, well, they can almost do the job but not quite, and you can't find somebody else better. Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean long-term you're still not looking to replace that person. You should always be on the lookout to replace that person. Don't leverage your position for non-corporate goals. And there's all sorts of non-corporate goals that have nothing to do with the company that people sometimes abuse their company for. I'm not saying if you don't do any of these things, you can't be successful, because there's a lot of Bay Area companies that quite well violating all of these things. I just think your chances are easier if you do this. There's a story about, I think, was it Sergey Brin or Larry Page? I think it's Sergey Brin. When they first did it, Google, his lawyers and HR was like, yeah, I don't think you should be sleeping around with the staff. And he's like, why not? They're my employees. Yeah, don't be that guy, okay? That's a good way to ruin your company for the stupidest of reasons, right? Just don't don't abuse your position for things you don't. It's not germane to the company. So, who's going to speak truth to the founder and CEO to tell them that, yeah, this product isn't going to work. You're not doing a good job of managing your executive team or your developers. Like, who's going to be that person? Like, who's going to, how do you keep your mind open so that you can recognize when you need help and where? And it's really easy to say, and it's really, really hard to do. But I think at least if you just sort of have that conversation with yourself, you'll be surprised at, like, the constructive criticism that you can get back from your reports on how good of a job that you're doing and stuff. There's 2 books I suggest on this. It's sort of like, it's part org and it's part culture. And the one I really recommend is this one called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And what do you need in sort of a group or an organization for that group to be successful? And it can be a small group, it can be larger groups or whatever. And it goes across different disciplines to do that with some of the research there. And then there's another one from Ben Horowitz, which is What You Do is Who You Are. And it's, I mean, you're all familiar with Horowitz and whatever. He's got another book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which probably also is a good read too. And I'm not saying that I agree with everything that they say. And I'm not looking to join or create a company, that Horowitz is, meets all Horowitz's examples. But I think the important thing is that if you read books like, especially these 2, you basically think to yourself, where do you want to play on that spectrum? Do you want to be hardcore, performance is everything? I don't really care about the people that are there. I mean, that is one way to go. You can be successful at it. Or do you want something else? But what I'm saying is think about it, right? Think about what you want and then move towards it. Because if you don't, you're going to get something very different than what you wanted, basically, on that. Before I go on to the next section, does anybody have any comments or stories they want to share on this sort of misalignment or how as you, a CEO founder, will protect the company from you, basically?
Hey, this is Andres. Thank you for everything, Steven. I'd like to, if I may, just give a quick recommendation. About a year ago, I started implementing what I learned in this book called Who by Geoff Smart, which practically focuses on whatever problem you have is not a what problem, is a who problem. And it goes all the way back from recruiting, right? So it gives you a very clear methodology on recruiting. And then once you have people on board, onboarding, and then once they're in the company is the proper, I guess, qualification for A players, B players, C players, and how do you treat those different categories. And we've been applying it in our companies for solidly for a year, but kind of back and forth for 2 years. And it has given us tremendous clarity as to how do we bring those A players to become company leaders, the B players to provide training and support so they can become A players, or at least, as you said, stay as B players that can be part of the support structure. And how do you minimize the amount of C players that you can have in the company? So I just, I've been practicing for quite a bit and implementing it with my human resource team, and it's been quite successful. So Who by Geoff Smart is a book that I would say complement the ones you're mentioning.
Yeah, and good for you. I mean, I think so many folks, they, there's something that's complicated and there's something that's complex, right? The two aren't the same. And groups of people are amazingly complex, basically, and people don't spend enough time trying to figure out what that complexity looks like, because you get this kind of organizational variability that can be really crazy. It can be really high or really low, and you don't even know how that's going to work. So good for you for, coming up with a system and not waiting till basically a big problem happens before you did it. What caused you to focus on it? Was there something in particular that caused, or just something you wanted to do?
Well, kind of what you just said, it did become a problem, and it became a little confusing as to understanding is the right person in the right place doing the right things, and those 3 levels don't always work. It could be the right person from a values standpoint, so great because we trust them and they're loyal and it's great, but their competency level is not at the right level. So then you have the right person, but from a trust standpoint, from a culture standpoint, but not from a competence standpoint. And then we also started having a bunch of people that were the right people, but not in the right place. And you having the right people not in the right place, then all of a sudden they start spinning their wheels. And one of our operations managers was really struggling, although he's one of my key A players from a trust standpoint and from a process standpoint. And we had to remove him and put him in a process improvement side and the quality side, and he started flourishing like the way we knew he could, just from an alignment standpoint of the right people in the right place doing the right things. And it was more seeing how certain areas of the company were really weak and where communication would halt, where we started realizing that we needed a methodology to try to tackle that problem.
No, good for you, man. A lot of people will give up on people because they're not performing, they're not whatever, and then just sort of toss them aside. And I have a friend who's just like yours. He was underutilized, and he's a smart guy. So smart guys who are underutilized, who want to do more, they become frustrated, right? And they essentially become bad employees. They're goofing off, they're watching YouTube or whatever, but you can put them in a situation that's more appropriate for what they want to do and what they can do. And it's like getting another employee. It's like turning a C into an A, overnight. And a lot of people they won't go through this. Like, it's not working out, go hire somebody else. I'm like, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, the scalability issue. Like, if your organization can't train, it can't look to put people there, you're going to have a really hard time growing your employee base, right? I mean, you got to work with what you have to a certain extent. You got to build, well, it's like building a company, it's building employees. Well, anyway, thanks. That's a really great story.
Thank you.
Does anybody else ever had these issues? Oh, come on, you can't tell me nobody else has had these issues besides Andres.
You already know my horror stories, so I'll keep quiet.
Oh, well, Fernando, do you want to give some ETF.com examples of misalignment? If you don't, I can give some. I mean,
yeah, I think let's go on.
Anyway, I should probably give more ETF.com examples in this.
Maybe Luciano wants to say something.
No, it's not a question, but if you have any comment on this. If one follows what you're sharing with us, at some point in time, the CEO will be that one. Will be the one that has to step out of the company and lead with deal with that thing, with that problem. What would be your advice? When is the right time as a CEO to say or think, this this is the moment that I have to give the chance to the company or my my company to have another general manager, another CEO that can be a better leader for the company. I mean, at some point it would happen to you. I mean,
that's right. There was the what was it? It's a Batman movie saying, "You stay around long enough, the hero becomes the villain," right? If you just
exactly.
But I'd say, like, first of all, like, I mean, actually, to sort of Andres' comment, right? The CEO just might need more support. So I've seen some CEOs, like, what does the CEO really do, right? It's not necessarily, well, I mean, a smaller company, it depends at the level that you're at, right? But I mean, broadly speaking, the CEO is a representative of the corporation as an entity. Doesn't mean he's the best product person, best tech person, best salesperson, right? His job is to align all the bits beneath. But some CEOs, as you get in different parts of the stage of your company, maybe you're really there to sell the dream to investors, you're there to sell the dream to partners or to customers, but your general management day-to-day experience might not be that great. So for instance, if you're a younger, more inexperienced one, then I would say, like, yeah, maybe you want to bring in the equivalent of, not a president, because it's like a 40-person company or whatever, but it's sort of the equivalent of that day-to-day GM, whatever you want to call that role, or chief of staff. I've seen some small companies do that type of stuff. And then that person runs more the day-to-day and lets you focus more on what you're good at. So I would say first shot, because you're the founder / CEO, is, how can you find the people to do what you're weak at, to concentrate what you're good at? That would definitely be my first path. Because who's responsible for removing the CEO is the investors, right? Because they want to protect their investment and they're not going to grow it. So they'll yank you out just like that if they think the money's out on the line. But I definitely think a lot of CEOs would just benefit from, can you let go, which is really hard, I think, for a lot of them. And then the second one is, can you put people in place? Like, yeah, when you're a 3-person company, the CEO can be product guy. When you're a 30-person company, probably not a good idea, right? Probably you should hire, some product management function or something. So, I mean, that's probably what I would say on that kind of stuff. And you see it at all levels, by the way. It's not just CEO. It's just every level. They have trouble letting go and acknowledging, like, you need to build a team or a department or whatever underneath you. I suffer from this. Okay, last section, goals and growth mismatch. I see this a lot too, I've gone through this a few times. So we talked about this before, growth in your audience, or is your audience in the growth, right? Figure out where you want to play on that. So growth feels great, but it's the right growth. Oh, I'll tell ATF.com story. So, we grew that thing about, like, what, 10 times in 2014. So maybe about 6 years, grew it 10 times. It's a niche site, so, all sorts of good things going for it, right? But there's a small problem of, like, was this the right growth for ETF.com? Like, well, who are you going after? And originally it was like financial advisors, and I was very honest. Fernando's in these conversations. I tell them, like, look at where we're growing. There aren't that many financial advisors in the United States. So obviously we're getting a lot of retail traffic, some of which are financial advisors, some of which are institutions. So it's kind of like industrial fishing. There's the fish you want, and you just catch all this other stuff sort of along the way. And so is there an opportunity there, or do you still want to stay with this financial advisor space? Because if you do, our product strategy probably isn't quite aligned for that. Our growth strategy isn't aligned to that. We should be focusing on a different group. And ETF.com was never really able to we still grew a ton, but they really liked that growth, right? But there wasn't a lot of money on the retail side, so kind of stuck in this limbo. So long as the metrics kept on going up and to the right, they were happy. But I think it hurt sort of the business. You couldn't really grow in the direction they really wanted to grow in, or they weren't sure. And part of it, they got acquired a few times, and their senior management past them was not good about any kind of direction. But anyway, so I would advise is either change your growth KPI or lean into where the growth is. Like, pick. Don't get stuck in that middle, because it's just kind of sad. Opportunity, yeah, it's engagement times size times monetization per unit. If this is low, monetization per unit is low, then you need to be really big to make the economics work, right? Or they need to be a lot of engagement so that you get a lot more monetization of it. Or conversely, if the size is really low, then that monetization per unit needs to be really high. I mean, just figure out where you want to do it. Make it a considered thing, especially for those of you who've hit some kind of growth spurt. It's really easy to say like, well, we're growing, what's the problem? It's a success, right? And it's like, well, it might not be the right kind of growth. And you won't know until like 2 or 3 years later. And then be like, well, how did we get here? It's like, well, we probably should have spent some time growing to where we really wanted to grow 2 years ago. Also, I'm going to say real fast that like, you know, I've been in a few places where we grew a lot, you know, for a while, and then we stopped growing, right? And when we stopped growing, that's when it was like, what do we do? And you know, I'm just the growth guy, and I would tell them like, well, you were supposed to figure this out while you were growing. You can't wait for things to flatten out. When that happens, you're not dead, but you're definitely not doing well, right? The best time to think about like how you want to change things a lot is when times are good. And people are kind of weird. They're like, if things are good, we shouldn't change anything because we don't want to mix, we don't want to jinx anything. But the reality is that like better to do it while things are good, to think about your bigger changes than to wait for when times are bad. When times are bad, your horizon shrinks to, you know, a quarter ahead of you, 3/4, you know, whatever. There's no time for that. That's my one warning. Is when times are good and you're on that growth curve, that's the best time to think about how you want to transform the company. What's that next level? Basically, don't just sit there and bask in the growth because it's so awesome. We probably did a little bit too much of that ETF. I'll say, you know, as you heard me talk about segmentation, I'll talk about this a little bit more later in the slide. Like growth is usually in segments that spread to other segments, right? So there might be a group that you might want to penetrate, but you should give some strong thought to the adjacent segments on that. And yeah, if I can penetrate this one, then my chance of getting into the next 3 may be 30% easier because they're adjacent. That might be more attractive than this bigger segment. It's easier to penetrate, but less adjacencies on there. And so the example I gave with Seesaw is sort of a good example. I mean, they took a look at those segments. Well, it's probably more of the other one, but they take a look. We can move into this other one. And yeah, pick the segments that you want to focus on. And well, I'll talk about a little more detail in the next slide. So also as a growth guy who grew a lot on some of these places, and then the growth stopped. And when I was younger, I was like, why? What's the problem? We're growing. But you know, as I got older, I realized like those cohorts are very precious. And for those of you who are more on the B2C side, you think you have this sort of infinite number of customers out there. You just keep on bringing them in, and you'll get things to work, and eventually you'll start growing. But that's not really how it works. I mean, there's a finite amount of customers within a given segment. You can't just say, well, I'll just bring in the next 10,000 and I'm good, right? Because one day you'll brought in like, you know, I make up a number, like 40% of your SAM or your TAM or whatever. You know, to get that last 60% is incredibly expensive and painful. To re-pitch yourself to the 30%, 40% that you've already pitched themselves, and for whatever reason they said this isn't for me, is very, very expensive, right? So I can cut back to here, I'll cut ahead. You know, what is your learning framework for your cohorts? Like, as you bring them in, what are you going to learn from them? What's your learning framework infrastructure, whether it's technical or organizational, whatever, what is your learning loop, however you want to call this, right? You need to learn something from every batch of customers that you bring in. So that way you can test on the next cohort, or you can change things for the next cohort and get those, you know, get those metrics going the way you can. But don't just sit there and think, well, we're just going to continue to grow. And it's a tricky thing because hypothetically, let's say I could grab everybody you wanted on day one to be exposed to your product, but it's before you know what you're doing. They could experience your product, decide it's not for them. You can't ever get them back, right? Because you have to convince them you're different now. But if you act too slow, the competition might come and lock them in. What's the trade-off on that one? Don't know. So I don't think a lot of people do this. A lot of my employers haven't done this. Myself personally, I haven't done as good a job on this as I should have. But what is that learning framework so that you can learn from every cohort on that? So I just pulled up some random growth curve, and this is the funny one. It's also pretty old, but it's like things are great, and then basically the novelty wears off, and then you just got to go through this painful thing. Hopefully you get up here. And the only reason I bring it is I just want to say, like, basically as you go through any stage, doesn't matter what curve it is or whatever. If you don't have a learning framework on here, you're just going to go wherever the customer wants you to go, given any given stage of your product. If you have a learning framework, my feel is that you have a much more control over influencing what the shape of this curve looks like. Without a learning framework, you're not going to have one, basically. So that's why do people stay? Why do people go? Why did people never come on board and begin with? And segmented. Again, it's always segmented within a given segment. What are the answers to these questions? So let's talk about segmentation for a little bit. And actually, this talks about some of the stuff I talked about earlier, but never look at your customers as a monolithic and homogeneous group, because it's just not actionable. So, like ETF.com, what is a user? It depends what segment you're talking about there. So things like, let's say on the ETF.com side, well, what was a revenue per visitor? I mean, it's sort of fundamentally inactionable. Like that revenue per visitor is a function of what those different segments, how they found value in your site. It's not a site, it's not a metric itself that is easily changed on its own, because it has, I could say, well, let's get them to stay on the page 3 minutes later so I can serve them another ad or something, but you're not providing any value to those segments. You're not improving the core profitability of that business. An example I'll give is like, well, you could optimize across 100,000 users versus optimizing at 25,000 university student users, 20,000 institutional, 55,000 retail investor. Like, that's your point of product optimization, your marketing messaging, your cohort analysis. It has to be done at this level, not at this level. Otherwise, you're just going to get a bunch of bad data, basically. And so there's sort of, I talked about this earlier, there's product category, there's category importance, right? So maybe 25,000 university users might have a low lifetime value as a university user, right? And maybe only makes up like, 25% of customers, but 15% of sales because they're poor and they don't have any money. And then you find out that institutional users might have a high LTV because they're institutions, they have a lot of money, they make up 40% of your sales, but they make up a small percentage of your customers. But what happens if they're related? What if it turns out that the people who go into the institution were those university users who are using your product early on? Now, what does the LTV of your university user look like? So really assumes you have the really strong knowledge of your segments and how they're related. And so some of you might be familiar with this concept of like account-based marketing, where you have to focus on positions throughout the value chain. So it's the analyst, the manager, the director. Like there's a lot of people that go into adopting, for instance, a complex B2B solution and stuff. And you don't always just want to focus on that senior person. You have to focus on the whole piece. And so this would sort of be an example like that. But you can't do it if you don't have any concept of your segmentation. You don't build your analytics to capture that kind of information so that you can take a look at all this stuff by the segment. Let's see, I can't remember how many more slides I have on this, but I'm going to say this. This is also a weird one I get. It always surprises me. So, hey, growth usually requires some upfront risk. So you did the risk for development time, you took lower salaries, there's a higher risk of blowing up, right? All startups understand this. But then they get irrationally very cheap, like they do all this stuff ahead of time, but then they get very cheap later on. So the example would be like $0 for marketing. Like, I just want you to grow organically, or you're going to be the 105th employee before you get your first marketing hire. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm not just saying this as a growth person, even if I were a business owner. Like, I tell folks, you should think of your marketing and growth personnel as education or R&D, not user acquisition. Like, the user acquisition will come if you can learn by putting your message out there in the marketplace and have it thrown back in your face or whatever. And same thing for sales and whatever. Like, if you have a learning framework on this, I think you can get a lot more ROI off of your marketing and growth personnel. And so I personally think most people hire the first marketing person too late. Because if you bring in somebody, I'm not saying they should be your second employee, but if you can bring in somebody early, they can do market research, they can write content, they can reach out into the community of customers that you're looking to get, interact with them, see what they want. They can use channels to validate. So a lot of people, for instance, will use PPC to come up with ways to see, well, what are people looking for in our space? Where is the click-through rates the highest for a given type of ad copy? And then of course, when you get there, it's just like, hey, coming soon, sign up for more updates or whatever. But it's a way to get data from the market beyond you going out individually and talking to one person after another. You should still do that for sure because it has context. But you also want sort of this learning at scale too, and I think marketing can do that. They also get irrationally cheap when they stretch people thinner and thinner and thinner because they don't want to increase headcount. And the cost of extra headcount is whatever, say X dollars, right? And unless you hire a bad person, it's probably like the worst case scenario is that you're going to waste that money, right? But if you think about it, if you put more functions on this one person or a few people, and we've all done sprint estimates where you sit there and the CEO goes, does that really take 20 story points or could it be 19? And then they keep on doing that for every story until next thing you know, you've created a full-time employee out of thin air by shaving points off of everybody else. It doesn't work that way, right? There's no kind of precision on this. And so I'm always surprised when people won't put in money. We're going to hire these one or two growth people so we can grow the business 30 to 40%. They won't do that, right? Because they just like, well, we'll make the money first and then we'll spend the money, which doesn't even make any sense. Like, well, how did you make the money in the first place? Even at the company I work in now, they tend to acquire companies and they'll lay off X number of people and then put those functions on other people at the company. And so like I've got one person where I work, she's spread across 4 companies. If they were separate companies, they would have at least one marketing person in each of those companies. But for some reason, the employer says, no, it's better to have one person do it. That doesn't make any sense to me. So they'll do more projects and they ignore the technical and operational debt of past projects. And you guys are all familiar with this, but it's just easy to do. It's like, and this kind of leads into this one, right? So, the growth in time. Now, growth is not business growth, the growth of anything, right? Growth in complexity, growth in cost, growth in whatever. And so how most founders or most executive management teams that I bump into want to believe the world looks like this. They're going to hire these employees on some sort of linear scale, okay? And then what the dream is that revenue looks like this. And then what happens is that you can basically pocket the fixed costs. The difference between the fixed cost and the variable, you just pocket this. You just make more and more and more money as this goes up. But I don't know, my own personal experience, and I have no math or no research to back this up. This is just my own head. You have this sort of hidden complexity curve that looks something like this, basically. And the further this gets away from your headcount, the more danger you're in if this goes somewhere weird, right? And then by the time it breaks, it's too late. Most people do not hire in some way to recover it. You have to train them, you have to merge them, you have to mold them, and whatever. And so what I tell folks is easy for me to say and harder to do, but even on my own growth roadmaps, I do the same thing. There's a certain amount of optimization stuff that I'm going to do, which is more linear improvement, like it's kind of what they call local maxima. But what I tell folks to do is like, you should be thinking of, for whatever infrastructure we're talking about, after X period of time or whatever, preferably when times are good. And I know it's hard because you never have time for it. Nobody ever has time to do this. You might want to think about that more of a stepwise function on that infrastructure. In other words, how should we really change things? So, I mean, Andres is a good example. Like, this isn't working. We need to radically transform this. So that's an example of a step function. An example of a linear function would be like, oh, well, we'll either get rid of them and continue to do what we do, but we'll just do it 10% better than what we did before. We won't have this problem anymore. And a lot of companies don't struggle with thinking like this. Like, to get this level of growth, you need another layer of infrastructure here. Just incrementally increasing what you're doing doesn't match the complexity of the business, and we'll put this green stuff at risk. And give your time to execute, which is why I say the best time to do this is when times are good, not when times are bad, because now you run out of time. Okay, that was it on that bit, and I ate up an hour and 50 minutes of time. Does anybody have any questions on or comments on just that, or experiences they've had on sort of aligning their growth to the right goals?
I have a question, Steven. Hi, it's Juan Daniel from Picker. Yeah. First of all, congrats for the talk. It was amazing, everything you said. I have a special question. How would you define the skills, like head of growth, like the head of growth or manager of growth is not like a very common job description locally here. Like usually they're more attributed to sales manager, stuff like that. So like, what would you define the skills or the specific skill set for a head of growth? It is very, very like alienated to a specific industry, or would be like more wide?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I've worked in a lot of different industries, and I didn't necessarily have any experience in those industries when I came in.
My question was going exactly to that point. Like, how do you find a head of growth, and what skills you should look for?
Oh gosh, I'm going to give you a couple of different viewpoints on that from what I've seen. At least, by the way, I live in San Francisco. For those of you who didn't know, so some things I've seen. I'll talk about mine because it's the easiest one because I lived it. I pride myself on taking time to learn a lot of different parts of the company. So my base is digital marketing, so to speak, but I've worked with a lot of product managers. I can be one like for short periods of time, spent the time to learn the analytics at a certain level. I spent time to see what the sales process was like. How does technology work? So I love working with developers and stuff. I think they're a fun group to deal with. Operations, right? So in my mind, you want a growth lead that understands how all of these things are supposed to work together to drive growth. So for instance, let's say you were trying to hire a growth lead for e-commerce and they're really good at digital marketing and whatever, all that kind of good stuff. But if they have no concept on how to forecast inventory or what the lead time is to get a new product into the warehouse, they're going to hit a limit really fast. Like there's all this stuff that goes into somebody giving you a check for money that I think people need to understand, like, or support, like in e-commerce for us. I know the holidays are going to come up. I know we need to staff up our customer support by, twofold of temps. And if you don't, you're going to be in a world of trouble, right? And so I think people with a more well-rounded view, I think make for really good growth leads. People who want to win. I mean, let me rephrase that.
It sounds pretty much like another, like at least on the stage I am right now, or pretty much all companies are right now. It's like another CEO. Like it's like a mini CEO. You know what I mean? Like, because that's usually what you do when you're at that stage. So it sounds awesome, but how would like? I think you know what I mean. Like because it's very wide. It's very so. What approach should we take to find someone like that is not considered to be just another CEO or a role like that?
I don't know if I would say this is sort of a CEO type of thing because they're not equally important, right? And so I think I would say somebody who focuses a lot more on the demand gen side if they're looking for that type of role, but they know how the other parts roll into it. Like they know it's not in isolation.
Okay, get it.
Basically. In particular, I would focus on probably the demand gen and the analytics side. And then, I mean, to me, the reason why you see growth roles now instead of marketing roles is because for me, growth is a combination of sales, marketing, product, and analytics. Those are the four that are closest to me, basically. So I would focus on somebody they have to know how those four things really work together. Another mindset is like, it's sort of like product-led growth as opposed to more of a demand gen type of growth, which is the most organic way, right? If you're not growing because your product, it means your product's not really that good.
Yeah.
So, some people hire growth personnel as part of the product team. Like growth is considered to be a feature of the product. And then that person works with marketing and has the analytics on how well the application is doing and stuff like that. So that's another point of view on that. I mean, I would say like, if you can't find well-rounded personnel, well then, yeah, I would sort of lean towards the demand gen, lead gen.
Like a digital marketing or e-commerce manager or stuff like that, exactly. Which is very, very analytic based or stuff like that, right?
That's right. And then, but spread them out into other areas. So for instance, when I first started my career, I was a search engine marketing analyst. And then they needed somebody to do the web analytics and nobody else wanted to do it, right? So they says, well, do you want to do it? I'm like, sure. And so once you understand the analytics side of it, then you suddenly get a very different look on product management, basically. And you can grow them out. Going back to the discussion about organizations and growth, you can grow those folks out into the growth person you want, even if you can't get it right away. And same with product, right? I mean, product should understand its analytics better than anybody else.
Yeah.
So they should be able to inform your marketing people on what do we need to attract more people of this type. And maybe your growth person comes out of product. I mean, growth can come out of a whole bunch of different areas.
All right, got it. Thank you.
On that point, I don't remember where I saw this, but I've already suggested it to Luciano and other people here. For digital marketing in general, I think a good combination, like say, more well-rounded, but like highly analytical, but also with like a marketing background. So here in local universities, there seems to be, at least in one particular university, there seems to be like a double, people get a double major in finance and marketing. And I would think that those would be like the highly trainable people for something like this.
Yeah. At some level, you just want somebody who wants to crush the other guy. I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but I mean, like, person just wants to win and likes seeing those numbers, and those numbers every day tell them whether or not the person is winning or losing. And they just want those numbers to go a different way. Like, just there's a certain type of person who cares more about that, and there's others who don't. Like that growth number is their score. It's how they know how they're doing in life, basically. Does I don't know, does anybody else have anything? I mean, how many of you folks, how do you, your companies, how are you approaching like your marketing and and your growth and sort of investing in it and getting segmentation or the goals or whatever? I mean, where are you folks in your life cycle?
Well, in my case, we have pretty much a like automated marketing funnel. Like we work a lot. Like my question before was coming because I just hired someone who is starting to be pretty good on the digital marketing part. So I'm trying to look at him off as like to maybe put him on the task of being my new head of growth. When I was hearing you, I was like remembering all the things he has been doing. So it has been pretty much automating every marketing part of the process. Like, so it goes all pretty easy.
Cool. Just curious, like, what's the hesitation in promoting him?
No, I don't have I don't want, no, I'm not looking to promote him right now, but when you were talking in the talk
Okay.
previously, you told that you were telling us like, hey, give him better, like more, like more risk, or try to give them more jobs to do to see if he can make the role and then promote him, right? So
Yeah.
I was thinking about doing exactly that with him.
Yep, there you go. All right.
With Pardux, we're actually just in the process of developing the marketing strategy and the structure in which we want to market our product. With our other, I guess, more mature or traditional businesses, we are in one of the cases we're actually working on what is called a creative destruction of the current model. It reaches maturity and staying the way it is just clearly the numbers are starting to show that if we don't destruct our current model and destroy our current offering and turn it around on its head, then that's the only way we can kind of attack the new generation. So I guess not related particularly to Pardux, which is part of this program, but in relationship to what are we doing in other areas of our businesses is truly focusing on how do we destroy models that have been proven successful but are reaching their maturity state, which I think it's also something that's going to happen to all of us sooner or later, with our models right now.
Yeah, no, it's good. A lot of people don't like the thought of their own death, and definitely don't like planning for that rebirth either. So good for you. Good for you for looking at it.
We're almost looking for products that cannibalizes our current products and services, just so that we can, if somebody else is gonna do it, might as well be ourselves.
That's right. Jeff Bezos has this phrase: "Your margin is my opportunity." And
Right.
where you make money is where I can attack you because you won't let it go. And I think it's very much think it's very much true. If you don't do it, somebody else, somebody else is going to. What's the industry, by the way?
In security and logistics, actually, a couple industries.
Mhm.
The one that I'm referring to right now is in the security industry, which has reached its maturity from different angles, but it also has brought in a ton of different innovative products and services that has changed the way people see security, from protecting who comes from the outside in to how you have control from the inside out of everything that happens in your home. So that is a completely change of mindset as to how you sell security services.
Yeah, that's right. No, it makes a lot of sense. Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has any comments or questions, but I've enjoyed your talk a bunch. So I really want to thank you, and I think it was not only not what we expected, but it was more than what we expected, and it touched upon a couple of other topics, more than marketing and growth. So at least I truly enjoyed your talk today.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to me rant for 90 minutes.
Absolutely, it was
Thanks,
great.
Stephen. It was
Thank you, Steve.
amazing. I take away optimization makes you brittle. It's backwards looking. So I think we all learned that lesson through COVID and all the supply chains.
Well, that's right.
Fiasco.
Yeah. Automakers thought they were so smart with their just-in-time inventory. Oops.
Yeah. Oops, exactly.
To be you.
So yeah, great talk, and we'll be in touch. And if you could share this presentation with us, I'm sure everybody here would appreciate it.
Oh, okay.
So Carmen will get in touch.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
See you folks.
Thank you,
Thank you
Steve.
so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.